often you don't really know where a company is. Like, you think you are at the inflection point, but maybe you aren't. And so many companies are kind of like stuck there. But there will be some VC funds that are definitely before the inflection, so a lot of incubators, for example, they're really like the first check for sure. And then some other companies that are really growth stage, and if a company is not doing many millions, they definitely don't even consider it. And I think a lot of founders don't even realize that there's like major difference between VC funds and they will maybe go to the ones that will never invest into them just because they focus on something different. I think also another thing that I think people don't appreciate is that like VC funds are actually under a lot of pressure to deliver returns, and it's really hard. I'm sure you all heard this thing about the power law. There's a bit of a power law, not just about startups, but also a power law about VC funds. And a lot of VC funds don't actually return the investments to their own investors. And, a lot of people say, so there's kind of like different kind of metrics that people look into VC funds. And like a good fund will maybe return like 3x or even 2x. So like 1x is obviously returning the money, but it's actually not enough because there's, the time value of money, and there's inflation, all sorts of stuff. There's the opportunity cost, so you could invest your money in something else. So for example, the Standard & Poor's 500 is something that for a lot of people has worked out as an investment strategy. And if you look at a lot of VC funds, don't return 1x. A lot of VC funds return 1x, but they don't return as well as investing in S&P 500. And so it's actually not like for most investors, VC might actually be very risky. You risk a lot for not actually having that good of a return. But it is an attractive investment. I think for many it's kind of sexy, I guess. Also, maybe it was fashionable. When interest rates were very low, like everybody wanted to invest in VC, and the money they went into VC was crazy, and it ended up being high valuations and all the problem it created. But I guess the point there is like it's kind of both an art and a science, kind of picking the right VC funds. Because it's really hard because you don't actually know whether a VC fund is doing well for 10 years. And I think the other point that I was going to make, a different kind of curve, not the hockey stick, but kind of similar curve, is the J curve. Like the return of a VC fund will kind of follow a J. So they are actually negative at the beginning, and then they're positive. Sometimes they kind of skip that, the kind of negative bit, but they may be flat, and then they grow. But people rely a lot in what people call TVPI. It's basically kind of the sum of the returns that, at least on paper, the fund has. So, simplifying a lot, but it's basically if they have 10% in a company, they will do 10% of the valuation of the company, plus, maybe they have 5% in another company, so it will be 5% of the other company. So you sum all the valuation of the companies that they own, and that will be kind of the total value of the fund. And simplifying a lot, that is TVPI. But it's not really necessarily the value for real, right? Like we all know that a lot of the valuations of the startups are kind of arbitrary. They're like, it's the inverse of that. When the investor invests in a company, it's like, okay, you need 2 million, I want 20% ownership, so your valuation is 10 million because I gave you 2 million, and 20% ownership, and kind of. And so what happens, and what happened actually in the 2022, after the bubble kind of, if you want, the VC bubble burst, a lot of valuations went down. A lot of VC funds had to revise their valuations. So the TVPIs that they had and maybe look really great, they actually were lower down, and they ended up not being great. And so when you're trying to pick between different VC fund managers, you're looking at the TVPI that their funds have at the moment, but you don't know whether this will actually be the valuation they have in a few years. And when you look at the data, you actually realize that a fund may be doing well and then it's not doing well, or a fund is doing poorly and then all of a sudden, they go really well. So again, it's kind of an art as a science and a science, because like you can look at these numbers, but they're not enough. The other kind of metric, because if this fund has already returned, 3 times the money, well, that's a great fund for sure, and maybe if they returned already after a few years, 1x, maybe that's great. But the problem is, you probably all know this, but like the funds usually are already expected to have at least 10 years. Usually 10 years, often they're supposed to be 10 years, but they're usually actually more like 12 or even 15 years. But because of this kind of long-term nature, it will take a very long time to know whether that fund actually has returned the money. So like it also kind of creates a selection. Like if you want to invest in funds that have very high DPI, it means that you're investing in companies that have funds that have existed for maybe more than 10 years. And a firm has to raise a new fund every 2-3 years, depends on the strategy, sometimes even 4. But anyways, like if I want to see like actual results of the cash that they return to investor, I have to pick companies that, if I want the ones that have that proven track record, I have to pick firms that already have existed by 10, 20 years. And if you think about all the business cycles, economic cycles that are behind, the world was so different 10, 20 years ago. Like, are these people still gonna be good, good fund managers? Are they still gonna be good at selecting the next companies, the next generation of startups? And so like these are kind of, again, going back to that point about the art and the science. Yes, there's the science of looking at the financial numbers, but then there's the art of saying, okay, like, are these good people? Do they, do they have judgment? Do they have a good network? How do they select the companies? How do they add value? Do they are they really different and somehow better than other fund managers? So like those are all the kind of considerations that basically we have to go through. We only invest Series A, but I also kind of know a little bit about the approach of the funds that we invest in seed and pre-seed. And like it's completely different if you're a pre-seed or a seed company. Actually investors put a lot of weight on just the team. If there's one thing that I hear more and more again, I sometimes ask from VC fund managers, like, what are maybe things you learned and, what are mistakes you did? And if there's one thing that I hear as a recurrent mistake is saying, oh, I got too much in love with an idea or a market or a product, but, the team in the end was not that great. And the thing I hear the most is actually like really selecting a great team. And so like I think if you are in the pre-seed and seed, the truth is that people are trying to judge the team, and the real financial metrics don't matter as much, but at the same time people are maybe looking at those to judge the team. And so like I think people will even have maybe more like rule of thumbs, like actually like just how quickly do they do new stuff. Like something I will hear from our VC fund managers, like if I talk to them 1 week later, have they like shipped stuff? Have they done stuff? Like, or are they repeating the same stuff, But I think that changes a lot from Series A. I think Series A is confusing because it means a lot of things to different people. Like Series A used to be what maybe seed is today. And it used to be the first institutional check until pre-seed and seed was invented and institutionalized. So like talking about the hockey stick, I think Series A was supposed to be when like you're just about to like have that explosive growth. But I think the reality that has happened in the last few years for sure is that like Series A, you're really not there yet, or you're not sure. But from Series A is definitely the point where people are really looking, and we do look at the metrics. And so I think there's looking at the metrics though more to kind of disqualify things, like looking to reasons to not invest almost. So but like for us, for example, if a company doesn't have 1 million in revenue, like we don't consider it. And then, but one point I will make on that, like on the metrics that people look at, like companies will try to make ways to pitch themselves better than they are. And so like they will say, oh, we have ARR, or like, oh, we have booked ARR. And so like, and I actually like a learning for me was like, that's not real ARR, and not real revenue also. So like, it's better. There's always other metrics that you can look at, but like at the end of the day, you have to have real traction and real revenue. So there's always a bit of a dynamic of like people invent new metrics to pitch themselves better, but like at the end of the day, if you're experienced enough, you kind of understand when there's bullshit. Or if you look at enough companies, then you actually really can actually potentially compare between different companies in the same space. So I think, obviously how quickly you're growing. The other thing I would say though is that it does change a lot between different companies. And so like, if you're somewhere related, like certain kind of companies will have like GMV figures, and like GMV figures as like maybe they process some kind of transaction and whatever, and they talk about basically like the amount of transaction that go through their platform, so to say, or if you're a company that helps other e-commerce, like helps e-commerce companies, so to say, they will maybe talk about GMV as like, oh, we have all this stuff is sold that really passes through our platform. And again, it's like some people look at that, but like it's not real revenues, right? So like you maybe compare GMV to other platforms that have GMV, but like at the end of the day, you want to know revenue. Like you're investing in a business, you want revenue and eventually business, and you want to know how quickly it's growing. But I was making the point that like, yeah, there are like a lot of like different metrics you might look at if you're only looking at one specific sector. But because we're looking at like a lot of different sectors, we try to be agnostic, and also we might not be expert of it. And again, like maybe, something people will look a lot at and we look at is obviously, a customer acquisition cost and LTV and, lifetime value of the customer. And you do that to understand, how expensive it is to grow. You might do it to compare with other companies, whether they're getting customer cheaper than others and so on. But, it's not like there is a fixed number that we're looking at. And I don't think you can really like expect the same from different sectors and so on. Like, it changes massively if you're kind of B2C or B2B, if you're enterprise, if you're a defense tech company that maybe only sells to government. So I know people always, a lot of founders always ask, okay, what do you look at? What do you really look at? But it's sometimes it's almost like you tell me what you look at, right? Like VC fund managers are basically like chefs. I don't know if it's a good metaphor, but the point is they kind of do the same thing, but they do it in very different ways, different recipes, different ingredients. But everybody more or less uses the same techniques if you look at it at a very kind of essential way, so to say, right? Like we all saute and fry and whatever. And we do look for the differentiation. So like we do try to look for, like VC funds that really stand out because of the way they source or the way they add value, or maybe they somehow have something good about the whole spectrum of sourcing, picking companies, due diligence, and adding value. But maybe the other thing I would say on that point is that like there is an element of like being conservative as well when you're investing in VC fund managers. If you have, the VC fund have their own kind of set of documents, basically, like an LPA basically is the kind of document that kind of regulates, so to say, the way the fund works. And so like, if you see something that is completely different from the market, you might get worried. So like, there's almost like an intrinsic kind of risk aversion in the system. At least the legal stuff and something like that, you want it to be fairly standard as much as possible.